Well, I mean, the timing of this summit is just coincidental, right? That it's coming right after the US election. This European political community format is the EU plus non-EU countries like the UK, like Serbia, like Turkey, and they only started doing these summits a couple years ago. It happens to be in Budapest because Hungary right now happens to hold the rotating presidency of the Council of Ministers, and by recently established tradition, that country is also hosting these EPC summits. Clearly, Viktor Orban, who is an ally of Donald Trump, is trying to use the summit to project a kind of European fealty to the new US president. But not everyone was so on board with that today. French President Emmanuel Macron gave a really barn burner of a speech at the opening of the EPC, saying that Europe must write its own history and saying that unfettered Atlanticism is not the answer. He was essentially saying that the EU needs to take some distance from the United States and set up its own sovereignty, not be dependent on the United States anymore. And clearly, this is a message that President Macron has had for a long time, but he was clearly relaying this in relation to the US election result the day before. The question is how receptive other EU leaders are to that message. And of course, President Macron right now doesn't have a lot of political capital. He suffered that major defeat in recent elections over the summer, and he is by many people considered a lame duck. There's speculation at this Budapest summit today that the election of Donald Trump could give him a new political raison d'etre, that even though he is domestically seen as the lame duck in France, that on the European stage he could emerge as the one driving the EU to try to unify, set up its own defense, and try to reduce its reliance on the US, and also to lead the EU's response on those trade restrictions you were talking about. Donald Trump has promised and pledged during the campaign to slap tariffs of up to 20% on EU exports to the United States. That would have a devastating effect on the EU economy, and obviously the EU would have to fight back. So right now they're looking at what measures they could take. Will Macron emerge as the one leading the resistance, the European resistance to Donald Trump, while Viktor Orban emerges as the one leading the EU, trying to push the EU to fall in line with Donald Trump? That's what is yet to emerge. Also, a lot of eyes are on Italy's far-right Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni. She has also been a big admirer of Trump in the past, though during the presidency of Joe Biden, she has really moderated, particularly falling into line on the war in Ukraine. Everyone's watching her to see, is she going to change her spots now that the US president has changed to Donald Trump? She's been kind of quiet the last days. The people at this summit are really watching her closely. Tomorrow, there will be an informal EU summit, so all the non-EU people will leave. The EU leaders will remain. And again, people are really going to be watching for what direction the EU is going to take. A lot of those discussions will be behind closed doors because in public, I don't think anyone wants to say something overtly negative about the new US president for fear of retaliation.
Dave, you mentioned Italy. Europe's far right is clearly celebrating Trump's election, and Italian Deputy Prime Minister Matteo Salvini of the far-right Anti-Immigration League Party, he posted this picture on social media saying, "Make the West great again," with various far-right European leaders. But they obviously see Trump's victory as helpful for them.
For sure. I mean, the European far right sees the wind in their sails at this moment. They, of course, have been on the rise for some time. They've come in first in several EU elections over the past 2 years, including in Italy and Austria and the Netherlands. But the question is whether Trump's win is going to really turbocharge their growth. That's where the possibility of a German snap election over the next months will become very, very important. Whether the far-right Alternative for Germany party will see a boost because they're seen as the party with the best connections to the new US president. That's the big question right now. It's interesting, actually, in that graphic that Salvini has put himself in there right next to Elon Musk, where the more logical choice would have been, of course, Giorgia Meloni. She is the actual prime minister, far, far more powerful than him, but she is his big rival among that right-of-center spectrum in Italy, so of course he did not include her. But I don't think many people are caring much about Matteo Salvini's opinion right now. They really care about Giorgia Meloni's opinion.
Dave Keating in Brussels, thank you so much for keeping an eye on the summit for us and that update. And we are going to Germany next because uncertainty looming over Germany as its Chancellor Olaf Scholz tries to navigate a political crisis. After